New York has lost a congressional seat. In case you don't know, this loss may affect you and your family. CUNY Professor John Flateau, who is a member of the New York State Redistricting Commission, will be joining me in less than a minute to discuss this. Also in this program, Judge Dweynie Paul will tell our Brooklyn 45 viewers about the surrogate court and how it affects you in ways you probably haven't thought about. I'm Sam Taitt. Dr. Flateau, welcome to Brooklyn 45.
Thank you for having me, Professor.
This loss of the seat I talked about earlier may seem to be political talk to those people who don't vote or who don't participate in census counts. Would you clarify all this?
It is a very important benchmark that New York has just hit, and it's problematic for all New Yorkers. The Census Bureau just recently released the first round of 2020 census numbers. The good news is New York's population did increase, according to the 2020 census, by over 800,000. We're now at 20.2 million people, but we're competing against 49 other states. And the not so good news is we just lost another congressional seat, as you pointed out, based on that count. In fact, we missed that seat, being able to hold on to it, by only 89 people out of the more than 20 million that were counted in New York. So we're now down to 26 members of Congress out of 435. And New York's congressional delegation has been shrinking and shrinking ever since World War II, when we peaked at 45. So you can see from 45 members of Congress down to 26. New York has been losing its political muscle in the national legislature and on the national scene. That means our voice is getting smaller and smaller in terms of advocacy for federal programs, services, a whole range of federal resources that we take for granted in education, in housing, in public safety, transportation. We receive billions of dollars a year. We're shortchanged. New York sends more money to Washington than we receive. And now with a smaller and smaller congressional delegation, that will be problematic for us to maintain our resources. The good news there, though, our delegation, though smaller, is mighty. The Senate majority leader for the entire United States comes straight out of Brooklyn, U.S. Senator Charles Schumer. The Democratic Conference chair for the entire House of Representatives, Hakeem Jeffries, comes straight out of Brooklyn. In fact, you're looking at a piece of his district.
Right behind you.
Yes, that will be in question. So the challenge is to figure out where New York will carve out one of those current 27 districts and bring us down to 26. And I have the honor, the privilege, the dubious assignment of being a member of the, as you mentioned, New York State Redistricting Commission that has that assignment to redraw all congressional districts, state Senate districts, and state assembly districts throughout the state of New York, based on the new 2020 census numbers.
I guess you do not know where this seat will be lost from.
No, not yet. Those who say don't know, and those who know or are working on it don't say. And I'm only one of 10 appointed commissioners, and we're on the front end. Those numbers were just released barely, I believe, less than 2 weeks ago. So So our job is to get a hold of those numbers, hold 2 rounds of public hearings throughout the state, including right in Brooklyn and the other 4 boroughs, upstate, Long Island, get feedback and input from the community, from the voting rights advocates, and then use that information to come up with a first draft map, which we will then make public. And then there'll be a second round of public hearings to comment on the maps that the Redistricting Commission produces. And the legislature will have the opportunity to decide whether they will be the judge as to whether they feel the commission has done a good job in answering those questions you pointed out.
So the commission will make recommendations, but they don't make the final decision.
The final decision resides in a few places. First, the legislature, but then we cannot rule out the voting rights advocates and our community leaders. If they're not satisfied with these maps, they can take us to court, state court and or federal court, and it could be a judge that ultimately decides or appoints. In the past, we've actually had the courts appoint an actor called a special master. They work under the supervision of the judge, and that person actually draws the lines. The judge will allow input, public hearing process, but the process can be taken out of the hands of the legislature if the legislature is too slow in carrying out its responsibilities.
So who will make the decision to withdraw the decision making from the legislature? I guess the question is, who controls redistricting in New York?
That's that power resides in a number of quarters. Voting rights advocates, community leaders, if their voices are loud and strong enough, they could bring a lawsuit. I've been a part of a number of lawsuits over the decades. In fact, there is one called Flateau versus Anderson, and that Flateau would be yours truly here. And the Anderson was State Senator Warren Anderson, the Republican majority leader of the Senate. I was the tip of the spear representing the Black and Puerto Rican caucus at the time. And our critique was that the Republicans then were trying to slow down the process after the 1980 census showed that there was a tremendous gain in Black, Latino, Asian population, and in New York City. One of our plaintiffs was actually representing Staten Island as well. So your voting rights advocates can kick over that can. A judge can take control over the process, but if the legislature moves with deliberate speed and is fair enough that there are no major critiques of their work, then the legislature would wind up putting through its process. But that has not always happened historically in New York.
Professor, you said we lost by 89 votes. My question
89 census forms. That was the difference between us holding on to our 27 seats and losing one. Just 89 census forms.
My question is, has COVID contributed to this?
Yes, definitely. In fact, on the one hand, it's almost a miracle that we did count an additional 800,000 New Yorkers in the middle of a pandemic. So if you put it in that perspective, but when you get that close to winning and losing, in effect, one seat, out of 20 million New Yorkers, I'm sure in our neighborhoods, if we had just pushed a little harder here and there, in a Canarsie, in a Bed-Stuy, in a Flatlands, I'm sure we could have found another 89 census form people and to solve that problem. But we missed the boat, according to the US Census Bureau.
And there's no way to recover from what you've lost or what we
Well, actually, there is certain jurisdictions. I believe the state of New York and the governor apparently has already asked the state attorney general, I think, to look into an appeal process. And when I worked for Mayor Dinkins, he appealed the 1990 census, but we lost. And our argument there was they missed buildings, and obviously people who missed building addresses and residents in those buildings, and our numbers should have been higher. So there is an appeal process, and hopefully the government jurisdictions with that authority are going to appeal and help us find 89 more New Yorkers.
And this is not encouraging 89 people who did not fill out the forms to fill out forms. This is just to find. What do you mean by maybe you can find?
Well, you could find out that maybe in one of the field offices, the numbers were not accurately accumulated. You know, this is a national project. So in New York City alone, I believe we had 10 or 12 field offices. It's also going in. Remember, people called in with an 800 number. People went on the internet. So maybe if a post audit is done of these various means that were used, we could come up with. It's possible theoretically, I think, to come up with a correction.
Yes.
But it'll be up to the Census Bureau to follow
to make that decision. Yes. Mm-hmm. We've heard a lot about gerrymandering.
Oh, yes.
Gerrymandering contribute to any of this?
Well, gerrymandering is part of the redistricting process. It's a malfunction of a political malfunction of redistricting. So what is redistricting? Redistricting is the redistribution of power, money, and public policy. And it's played out in the political arena and in the geographic arena. Our neighborhoods literally is the tableau that is played out on. And what happens is that different players are going to try to manipulate the process to their own political advantage, racial advantage. There are different kinds of gerrymandering. One is racial gerrymandering, which is still illegal. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court recently said that political gerrymandering is not so bad. In a couple of cases, within the last 2 years, they've decided that they're not going to weigh in on political gerrymandering, which means it's now left at the state and local level to literally fight it out, and if they so choose to try to manipulate the numbers, the maps, the lines to disadvantage, one political party over another, for example. So political gerrymandering is still very much in vogue. And then prisoner gerrymandering. Fortunately, New York is a national leader in neutralizing political gerrymandering. And what is that? That was a situation where we have a state prison system that at one point housed almost 70,000 inmates in facilities, mostly upstate New York. And what is happening still, the vast majority of our prisoners, though, are from downstate. They're coming from Black and brown communities, even though most of them are going to be back home in less than 10 years. Their numbers were being counted in upstate rural communities to fatten up their counts so that they could hold on to the upstate districts. So in New York, we've put some mechanisms in place that have eliminated prisoner gerrymandering in New York. So those are the different types of gerrymandering or political manipulations that are used as part of this redistricting process.
this exercise that just concluded, or we're hoping that it will conclude in another 2 months or 3 months. My question is, who determines how frequently these exercises occur?
This process called redistricting, it's actually mandated in the United States Constitution. I believe it's Article 2, that once every 10 years, there will be a decennial 10, national census, and that national count of all people within the United States, those numbers will be used to, quote, reapportion our representation in the national legislature. And those were the numbers that were just released. There was a recalibration, a recount, right, of 2020 census. There was one in 2010, one in 2020, every 10 years. So those new numbers said that Florida is going to gain a seat in the House of Representatives. Texas is going to gain 2 seats. California lost 1 seat. New York lost 1 seat. So it's a national recalibration using these census numbers to determine literally how many seats each state, each of the 50 states will have in the national legislature, the US Congress, based on those official national counts that are done. And then that same process is trickled down to the state and local level, because the state of New York is going to use those same numbers to recalibrate how many Senate districts there'll be in Brooklyn, how many assembly districts. And the city, New York City government is going to set up its own districting commission that's written in the city charter, and they're going to determine where the boundaries will be for 51 council districts. Right now, we're having an election under ranked choice voting, right, to determine the next municipal government, right? This is 2021. But by 2023, New York City will have redrawn its 51 council districts, and everybody that's run, every person that's in place or elected in 2021 is going to have to run again on new city council districted lines in 2023. So it's a process that starts at the highest level, the national legislature, but every state and local jurisdiction is also redrawing or redistricting its own, jurisdictional boundaries. Could be town councils, county legislatures, along with our state legislature, city councils, et cetera. It's a massive process that's underway. It's critically important that we pay attention to this and participate in it, because it's going to determine what our representation, who's going to lose a seat, who's going to gain a seat. So we should not be bystanders. Our communities, our representatives, our civic leaders, our faith leaders should be actively involved in this process. We should be protecting our communities. They're called communities of interest. When you hear the hearing schedule, our hearing schedule will start in June. Our representatives need to show up at those hearings with your own map and say, these are the boundaries for flatlands. Whatever you people do, we don't want you cutting us up into 4 assembly districts. We want 1 assembly member to represent our interests intact. Because if you're one community and you have 4 or 5 representatives you have to chase behind, guess who's going to represent you? None of them.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the word 4 and you mentioned the word 5. We actually have less than 4 minutes to go, so I've been told we have to wrap up.
Okay.
Professor, I want to thank you for being on Brooklyn 45 and for discussing this very important matter.
Well, thank you for this opportunity, this platform. Professor Taitt, you're always on point, and I would urge that our viewing audience look out for these hearing schedules, learn more about your local districting bodies. There are free resources out there to help you learn the process, literally help you draw the maps, etc., and be a participant, not a bystander. Our future, our communities, our power is at stake in this process. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Flateau. The COVID pandemic has put many families on the alert about life after retirement, or what happens after retirement. If you're in your 30s, 40s, or 50s, do you know enough to prepare yourself now to put your financial affairs in order for when you reach your 70s or 80s or 90s? We are living longer. Or to give advice to family members who may be fighting to protect their assets in court. What are those financial decisions you need to make to protect yourself and your family? My guest is a civil court judge who is preparing herself to be a surrogate court judge. Judge Dweynie Esther Paul, welcome to Brooklyn 45.
Thank you so much, Sam Taitt, Brooklyn 45, for this opportunity to be with you and discuss this very important topic about how the pandemic really helped to bring to light something that was always instrumental to our community, and that's surrogates court, as well as the power of estate planning.
But let's talk about the surrogate court for people who don't know anything about such a court.
This is true. There are several times you find people in our community, we may be familiar with criminal court, we're familiar with family court, sometimes civil court, but we've never heard of surrogates court. And surrogates court is the place we go when our loved ones pass away, whether they had a will or they didn't. And we make sure that all of their assets and everything that they worked hard for gets from one generation to the next. We also do other things in surrogates court. We do guardianships of disabled, mentally disabled adults. We do guardianships of minors, and we do adoptions. And so surrogates court is instrumental to the community because sometimes this is where our wealth is either preserved or it's lost. And oftentimes we do not like to talk about death. We don't like to plan for death. We don't talk to our family members about where our assets are, how many assets we have, where our bank accounts are, where we keep our papers. And this is very important. I think the pandemic really brought to light and highlighted these issues and how urgent they are. Because really, you mentioned the different ages, and death can come at any time. And estate planning really does give you the power to safeguard your assets for that next generation. But if you don't have a will, and oftentimes people don't realize that even if you do have a will, you have to go to surrogates court. So let's say if you do have a will. If you have a will, the reason you still go to surrogates court is because you have to go through a process that's called probating the will. And probating the will essentially means that you are verifying the will. The court goes through a process and allows other family members and potential heirs to be notified that the will is before the court. And there's a window of time for them to file objections. So someone in the family might say, you know what, my mother was not in her mental state at the time that the will was created or changed. And so they want to challenge the will. So you go through the process where the surrogate reviews the will, validates the will, and then distributes the assets. So that's something where the family really gains control over what's happening with their assets. The other option is if we pass away what's called intestate, which means we die without a will. And when this happens, and I will say the majority of Brooklynites who come through surrogates court pass away intestate without a will. And when that happens, that means that the court goes through the process of administering your estate. So for instance, in comparison, if you had a will, you would have had an opportunity to outline who the family member is that's going to be the executor of the estate, who will be able to go to the court and get legal documentation to allow you to go to the bank, and retrieve or manage the money that's in the bank account. Or if there's a home, keep the home, transfer the name of the property into another person's name, or if need be, sell the home and divide the proceeds. But if you go through surrogate's court without a will, if you pass intestate, that means the surrogate court actually goes through the process as if they were your loved ones to administer your estate. So the court has the documents, the legal documents called a letter of administration that allows the public administrator. The public administrator is a department within the surrogate's court. And so the public administrator acts as that family member and goes to the bank, retrieves the money that's there, any of your property, if you have jewelry, if you have heirlooms, anything that's important and valuable, they administer that estate. If items need to be sold, if there's a home that needs to be sold, then the court, through an attorney that the court appoints and pays, and if there's a need for real estate appraisers to value the home, even to the extent that we might need movers to come and move items out of the house. All of that gets done through the court. And ultimately, once bills are paid, debt is resolved, the home or property is sold, whatever remains gets to the family, gets to the heirs. But there's a big disconnect when the family member doesn't have the control and the power and oversight. So the surrogate is really the one who oversees that public administrator's office.
Well, you have a lot of power. Do you meet with families?
Yes. So if there's a case that's coming before the court, perhaps there's family members that are disputing the estate and the transfer of the assets, then they come before the court through different stages. They may come in and first meet with a court referee, someone who's going to sit through and sift through some of the legal issues before it gets to the surrogate court judge, or the issues will come directly to the surrogate court judge. There's also a department within surrogates called the small estate. And a small estate is anything that's under $50,000. And the small estate, for the most part, is more user-friendly. The clerks will assist the family members with filling out the documents, filling out the affidavits, so that that small estate can be processed.
Judge Paul, I understand that you are a candidate for Kings County Surrogate Court. Will you explain why?
That is true. I am a candidate for Kings County Surrogate Court. The election is June 22nd. I'm a candidate because I am so passionate about what this court can do for a community. My mother was an orphan at the age of 8. My family's Caribbean immigrants from Haiti, and I know the power of intergenerational wealth. And so the election is June 22nd. This is important to our community, and especially in light of COVID and how many people that have passed away and are in desperate need of this court. This position really makes the difference from one generation, starting from very humble beginnings and working so that the next generation can have a head start in life. My name will be on the ballot countywide. No matter where you live in Brooklyn, you'll find Judge Paul for Surrogate on the ballot. I hope for your support.
Okay, thank you, Judge Paul. Thank you for being here on Brooklyn 45.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Judge Paul. And earlier in the program, you heard Professor John Flateau talk about redistricting. On behalf of our Brooklyn 45 team, I'm Sam Taitt.
Brooklyn 45 is a 501c3 not-for-profit, and we welcome your support. Check out our website, brooklyn45.com, and feel free to donate or share it with your friends and family. Have any comments or questions? Send them to our Facebook, facebook.com/brooklyn45tv. If you have any questions or topics you think we should cover next, shoot me an email over at brooklyn45tv@gmail.com. Thank you again for watching.